because I have some meetings and stuff. But anyways, we're going to go over some subqueries. And we've kind of seen some subqueries before, so it shouldn't be anything too new. But we're gonna go over them because there's a few different ways you can do it. There's a few different things that they can do, and that's kind of the important thing to know is how to use them and kind of what the differences are between some of them. So if you've already gone through the PowerPoints, you'll know that there's some different names for them, like scalar subqueries and single row subqueries, and a lot of those just kind of make sense as to what they are. So we're going to kind of go over some of the different types, when they might be useful, any nuances, caveats to them, that sort of thing. And we've kind of used them before, so it shouldn't be anything too new. So like, for example, one of the, let's use Sequila here. All right, so like one of the ways we've often used if we're inserting into something, so just for the sake of showing it, I'm going to grab our Sequila and let's go ahead and put one in for customer. Just going to grab an insert statement here real quick. So for our and I think we did this at one point when we were putting in our like address ID. You know, we could put a subquery in here. So like, let's actually put in an address. I think that'll be a better example here. Or let's do city. I think we did this. In fact, I have one in the little tutorial, I think 1 week that we did. All right, so here's a good example where we're inserting into city and we need to get our country ID. So if I select everything from country, we can see our list of countries, and naturally we want to kind of connect with that. So the slow way is that you could run a select list. So like, let's say we want to add an address for Spain. We're adding a new city in for Spain. And what we want to do is we want to put our country ID to be Spain. So really 87. So right here on our country, it would be 87. And like, let's say we're inserting, I don't know any Spanish town, so sorry, but I have eaten at Olive Garden and I've noticed that word before. So that's what I'm going with. So yeah. And I think that's Italian now I think about it, but whatever, we're going with it. So we could put this 87 here, and that would correspond to the country ID Spain. So that's how we connect them together. This is the foreign key that will connect to the country ID, which is the primary key of the country table. That's one way to do it, but the easier way is with subqueries, because oftentimes, you know, we don't necessarily have the ID handy. And so a lot of times what you can do is you can just put in parentheses and then you can write a subquery. And I actually like to write my subqueries externally. So I will say select country ID from country where country is equal to Spain. And we should get 87. So this actually is exactly what we want, because this way we don't care what the number is. The number might change. For example, let's say we're exporting all this data, reinserting it, or someone accidentally deletes Spain and we re-add it. So now all of a sudden it goes from having country ID 87 to being country ID 93, or something similar. So that's where the subquery comes in, which is really nice because it's dynamic. It doesn't matter what the number is. The primary key, instead we're going to use the actual data that we know we want to connect to. So in this case, we want to connect to Spain. And so this one is going to pull for us. So we could actually run this and it's going to do the insert. And this is the exact same query at the end of the day. But this one is just dynamic, meaning that it will pull the country ID dynamically instead of having it hard coded, which is really nice. And sometimes it's easier just to do that than it is, especially when you're connecting to recently inserted data, stuff like that. It's nice to use those unique keys. So for example, there probably is a unique key on the country name. You couldn't have two Spains, for example. So this is actually really nice because it's the same as using the primary key because they're both unique. But we can remember Spain. We're trying to remember that Spain is country ID 87 is much harder. So that's where the subqueries come in. They're nice and easy. So this is called a single row subquery because it returns one row and one value. A scalar subquery, sorry. Because it returns one row, one value. Because in this case, if we added, like, we want the country ID and country from country, if we tried to insert this, it's a operand should contain one column. So it complains because we can't put two values into a place where it's expecting one. So another way to do this is we could select statements. So oftentimes we are writing our select statements and we need to kind of pull an additional like field, and depending on how we're doing it, it can get weird. A lot of times it happens when we're doing aggregations. So for example, we might want to write a query that gets the total amount from payment. So let's what is in payment anyways? We have amount. So yeah, let's say we want to select the sum of payment as total revenue from and the sum of amount. So a lot of times it's nice and easy to say like, okay, here is our total revenue. We kind of have a subquery for that. So what we could do is we could say select let's see, select everything from payment. I think there's a connection to customer ID. Yep. So we're going to get C dot first name, C dot last name. And then what we're going to do is we want to get like the percentage of the total. So for example, let's do the sum of amount divided by, so this is where it gets a little bit funny. So what we want to do is we want to find out what percentage of the total revenue is this customer's spending. So basically we're going to find out like, okay, which is our best customers and what percentage of the total like have they contributed. And that's usually kind of a more difficult problem, but this is kind of because there's always different ways to go about skinning a cat, but this one's probably, in my opinion, the simplest. So let's just start simple. So let's get the sum of the total as total customer rev. We're going to get that from, we need our D dot amount from customer C inner join payment P on C dot customer ID is equal to P dot customer ID. Then we need our group by, and we'll get C dot first name and C dot last name. So there's their total rev. Nothing too complicated. Pretty straightforward. But what we want to see is the percentage of the total. So if Mary Fowler spent $118, what is the percentage of our total revenue? So like what percentage of our business did she drive? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this whole subquery that got the total, and we can use this. And because technically where there are normally two aggregations, because normally in this we have our sum of amount and sum of amount. So it would be like 118 divided by 118 because we're grouping. So we have to do something kind of different here. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to just put our subquery to pull the total. So to kind of format this so it makes sense here, we're going to select I'm going to get rid of our alias because we just don't need it. Select the sum, you know, let's just put this all on one line because that way it's nice and short anyways. Rev percent total. Let me just make sure I have my parentheses right here. Yep, there's that one. It looks like we need one more. There we go. And there we have our percentage. Now we have the sum of the customer's amount divided by the total sum from everything, because we're not doing a group by in here. And basically the way this works is for every record, it's going to run this query. So it's going to run this query, you know, 599 times, which isn't very efficient. That's the key. Whenever you do a subquery, you have to realize where you're putting it and realize that there is a consequence. And that consequence usually comes in the form of performance. So, so yeah, we could actually take a look at this to kind of let's actually try it. Let's take this and we're going to use another version of a subquery, and kind of do the same thing. But real quick, just my OCD's killing me here. One thing I want to do before I do that is I want to turn this into a percentage. So I'm just going to multiply this by 100. There we go. So not very big percentages. Everyone's pretty equal, just lots of mass. So, all right. Okay, so let's try to fix this so we get it more performant, right? So this query is going to run 599 times, which in our case, you know, you couldn't even tell a difference. But when we're dealing with millions and millions of rows, that is pretty much not going to work depending on your subquery. So just as a kind of a quick hack, in fact, let's just take this. We're going to not start from scratch here. So I'm going to swap this just a little bit and show you how we can kind of do it to make it more performant. So we have everything going right here, right now. I'm going to take our select statement, our subquery. Let's just cut that out. And I'm just going to put a little comment here to where that should go. So what we're going to do instead is we are going to kind of do this little hack. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross join. And this is another good example of cross join. Now, remember, when we cross join, we multiply. So what we're going to do is we're going to take every customer, right? Every customer and every payment that they've had, and we're going to multiply it. So we're going to duplicate it across whatever we put in this subquery, which in this case is a single row and a single value. So it's not too crazy. So we're going to select the sum of the amount from payment, and I'm going to call this total. And then what we're going to do, now that we have this total field here, let's actually just take this out for right now. Let's just select everything so we can see what's kind of going on here before we do any aggregation. So here's all of our data. And you'll notice that we actually have like all of their payments, but you'll notice over here on the side, they all have this sum of the amount. So we have our total over here, because really all we did is we took every row and we added the sum of amount. We didn't have anything to match to, but we only have one value, so we can cross join it because we're getting the total. So this is also a subquery because it's just pulling it, but it's acting as a table. Technically, we could add more columns here, which we might do in a second to kind of parse it out into some other chunks. But for right now, it's just one single value. So now let's undo that, get some of our data here back, because we're going to take the sum of amount there. The only thing we're going to do a little different now that we have our total, I'm going to say total dot, and we need to give this a name. We're going to say as total rev. So now I'm going to say total dot total rev. And total is the kind of fake name we're giving it. So that's why it shows up there. And I'm just renaming that column. Up. And looks like we have an issue because we added a new column to our native query. So we just need to say total dot total rev. It's not going to matter because they're all in the same bucket. And there we go. Same results. The only difference is this one is far more performant because instead of running 599 times, it runs once. This because it's in the from clause. So remember the from clause runs first. So this is going to run right here. And when it hits here, it's actually just going to get that number and it's going to multiply it across all of our columns, which is, it sounds like a lot of work, but it's not that much. Versus up here, this would run. And then when it's pulling the data, every row, it would select, 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 select. Versus down here, it's just going to run it, get the number and copy it essentially. So it doesn't have to run select 599 times. It runs it once and just uses that same value because it already knows what it is. And then past that, it just uses the column name because from this point on, this is already a table. Okay. Let's do one more example. Trying to think of a good one. And I can't think of a great one, but let's just make something up here. So let's say we were going to take our customers and we wanted to, let's say we're kind of, there's this thing in databases where we fabricate data. And the reason we call it data fabrication is because we kind of make data up that doesn't actually exist in any table. So for example, let's say that we wanted every customer and we wanted to give them like 1 through 6. So like, let's say we're preparing to create a new data set that will say like, oh, like if they come in 6 times, then they get a free thing, you know, or if they do something 6 times, you know, you get the gist. So what we want to do is we want to take every customer and we want to give them 1 through 6 of something. And let's say, you know, let's just kind of, we're going to just kind of fabricate some data that doesn't exist anywhere else. So we're going to use our select statement, our subquery. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use our union. So this is actually kind of some perfect timing because I'm going to write some union, some set operators here to kind of help us. So I'm going to say select, and sometimes when I do subqueries, my formatting gets a little wonky. So we're going to just try this. So I'm going to select 1. And then I'm going to union all, select 2, union all, select 3, union all, select 6, union all. Oh wait, I jumped straight to 6. I was thinking, wow, numbers are way off. Select 5, union all, select 6. There we go. All right. And again, we're going to keep this cross join because we're going to multiply it. And I'm going to, here's a good example. Let's say we have customers and we want to call each and every one of them for a survey. I know we all hate survey people, but this is something that they might do. So we're going to call this attempt. And let's just real quick, I'm going to say as temp number. So I'm just going to copy that. So we can actually refer to our column when we need to. There we go. Now I can say attempt number. There we go. So now we have our people and the attempt number, and you'll notice that for every person, they have 1 through 6. So Mary Fowler has attempt 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we probably would want to order this by C dot last name, C dot first name, and then attempt number. There we go. So you'll notice that for every person, they now have like 6 records, 1 through 6. Right, and we want to keep track of that. So then we can kind of start fabricating this data where we have this cross joining. You'll notice that this is just kind of we're just doing a bunch of selects. So basically, we just create this like little fake table. In fact, and again, one thing I like about subqueries is that we can just run it and see exactly what's going on. We have our 1 through 6. All right, so that's like a multi-row subquery. So one more thing I want to show you is the scalar subquery, because we've gone over like the single row subquery. We've gone over the multi-row subquery. The last thing I want to show you is the scalar subquery and what makes a scalar subquery. So let's go back to this example where we have our people and their money, right? So we have their total. There we go. Oh, missing this parenthesis there. Still missing one because I think I deleted the wrong thing. There we go. Okay, so we're back to this example where we have the total sum of all of our customers. So the total revenue we got from each customer. Now let's say that we're doing an analysis and we want to see, a certain month. So like we have our total for each customer, and we want to see a specific month now. So what we can do is we can kind of do what's called a scalar subquery. And what makes a scalar subquery is that it's dependent upon the parent. So in this case, I'm going to write this separately. So let's say we want to find out, let's get the select, what's in payment. All right, so we have our payment date. So let's say we want to see what the total is in the month of, let's say July. I don't know the use case for this specifically, but let's say we want to say, okay, we have their total. So we could say what percentage of July was it for the whole total, right? Let's say we're comparing current month. So we'll use June. So the current month is June 2005. What is the percentage of revenue per customer that we had? So let's write our subquery to get the total revenue for the month of June. So we're going to select a lot of the same, actually. So let's just start here. And in fact, it's pretty much all going to be the same. The only difference is we're going to have a where clause. We want the year of P dot payment date equal to 2005 and the month fp.payment date equal to 06. So in this case, we should get the total only for the month of June. And so now we want to see this kind of here. Now we could throw this in. In fact, let's just throw it in and see what happens. I'm going to put it as a separate line item though. So as June. Now this isn't going to work because we have our first name and last name there. And just to show you, it's going to fail because we're selecting more than one column. So now we're kind of in a conundrum because, well, how do I get, because if I do this, if I take off the other columns to make it so it only returns one column, we kind of end up in trouble because now all of a sudden we can't group it by our person that we want to match on because we don't want the total for everyone for June. We just want the specific person on each line item. So you'll see subquery returns more than one row because we're still grouping by the person. So what we can do, and this is where it kind of gets a little interesting, is we can make this a scalar subquery because we have our amount here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add one more filter to our subquery. And we're going to say where our c.customer ID, and this is I'm going to say C2. So this is now customer 2. And I'm going to rename this P2. And you'll see why in just a minute. Okay, so now I have person 2, customer 2, so on and so forth. So now I want to say where our customer 2 customer ID, so this one right here, which is our June one, is equal to c.customer ID, which is actually right here. So whenever you do a scalar subquery is when the outer subquery actually is being used in the inner subquery. So if I were to take and run this, it actually would fail because it says, hey, I don't know about this c.customer ID in the from clause. But if I run this one, up, we did get our group by is a little weird. So let's hurry and fix that. We just need to put this and there we go. And so now we see that Mary Fowler spent $31.93 in June and $118 total. And that's a scalar subquery, and it is scalar because we're connecting the outside query to the inside query. We're filtering rows based on the outer query. Does that make sense to everyone? Like the distinction there between what we've done previously to this one?
Yeah, makes sense.
Perfect. All right. And the book might do a better job of having some simpler examples, but the way I always like to remember is if I'm using any part of the outer query in the subquery, then it's odds are it's scalar subquery. But it is kind of neat what you can do. Obviously, like I said, there's lots of different ways to skin the cat. Like this isn't the most performant way to do this, but sometimes it's the easiest. Sometimes it's the easiest way that is just worth just doing. So subquery, all it is a subquery within another query. But I don't want to talk your ear off. Like that's pretty much that's a lot of the examples I think I can give. Does anyone have any questions? Any specifics they'd like to know about?
In these scalar ones, the ones that aren't, when they rely on the outside query, how do you call the join on the inside always, or can it be done on the outside if they're not connected? How, like, I'm just trying to think that one through. I can see how it's working on yours, but on my own, I'm trying to figure out how I would, you know, when I'm running a select statement, I can get a value, I can do something and then put that in to get something else, but then how do you connect them if there's join?
Gotcha.
I don't know if I made a lot of sense. I know that you have to join them. Is it better to join them in the outside one, on the inside one? Because the inside one often can run kind of standalone, like it has everything it needs.
Yes, I think if I'm understanding correctly, so one thing to remember is anything with inside of the subquery is isolated. So I couldn't say, like, for example, if I were to say where P2 dot payment date is greater than or equal to, 2020-01-01. Like if I were to do this, it's actually going to complain that it doesn't know what P2 is. And this is called scope. And scope, basically anything within the subquery is isolated to the subquery. So I can't use anything that's generated in this subquery outside of here. You'll notice like that I had to put June there to kind of hack that one. But so we can use the outer query inside the subquery, but nothing can really come out of the subquery. It can only return things. So, it will return a value or a set of values where it sits, but we can't connect the tables that are used there, any of the other columns in the outer query. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just trying to wrap my head around how to do the joins if, depending on where you're needing the information from, because they seem so easy to me when I'm doing it, but as soon as I started doing these subqueries, then all of a sudden, how to join something that I'm looking for the inside that's standalone, like a value or a field or something, but then have that be what the query is based on for the outside one, how to join the information where it gets held.
Yeah, and that's why what I like to do a lot of times is I kind of like to write my outside first, or the inside, vice versa, depending on like what I'm doing. So for example, like in this case, I wrote my inner because I said, okay, I already had the outer, so I had like the total, and then I wanted to see like June, so I'll often write them separately. So like, okay, here's all my people and there's their June numbers. Here's all my people and here's their total numbers. And so then what I'll do is then I just kind of like, okay, so where do I want to plug this in? And so like for in this case, like if I wanted to get the percentage, like in that case, I had it like one off just as its own column. But if I wanted to get the percentage of what June was of the total in 2005, I could, I just kind of build my outer shell where I want it. And then a lot of times just to make it easy to read, I like to dump the subquery kind of in an indented section. So then what I'll do is I'll say, okay, I want this stuff, put it here, but then knowing that, okay, a subquery in this kind of fashion can only return one value, I then need to take off all this extra fluff and then connect it so that way it only returns the one value, because as of right now it would return the sum for every person, So now I just need to say, oh, I only want this subquery to return 1. So then I would just write my little piece to kind of make it work that way. But to do that without duplications, I have to change my aliases just like we did before. And then I want to say, okay, now my inner query. So when I'm talking about my inner query, I'm talking about customer C2. I want to say, okay, customer C2, your customer ID, I want it to match the outer one. Because, I already have all this stuff. If I had customer ID sitting over here that, we can't see right now, I want it to match the one that I'm going to pull. So then I just say c.customer ID, which comes from right there, which is our outer query. Then if I were to run it, it'd throw an error, but then I can just put, this one's going to be a little interesting because technically to get this one to work, I'm going to have to put the whole subquery again in the group by. Which it may not even like. Let's see, P2. From customer C2. It doesn't like something there, but.
So I need to be focused more on the scope, what needs to be seen at what point and how I'm calling it.
Yeah, that's usually what I like to do, and build them separately, because that's the nice thing is because once you build them separately, like in this case, like, okay, here's all my people. And if you really, when I'm doing like QA, like when I'm troubleshooting or trying to break something down really logically, I'll actually put like all the fields in there. So in this case, like customer ID, I would actually put that in there. So that way, when I'm, getting ready to throw it all together, I kind of have like all the variables in place to kind of see like, okay, where do I want to match on? And how do I want to go about doing this? So like if we were to, let's just back this up to where we were. And so now if we were to run these, you can see like, oh, they're pretty much the only difference is the number. And so yeah, I like to kind of build them both separate. And then that way, when you plug it in, because even at this point, if I really wanted to, I could say, okay, let's take this down to our single row. We could go like this. And there's all of our, even though we can't see the customer ID, the first name and the last name, we're still kind of doing that. And so that way we're ready. And then all we have to do is build our connection. And customer ID is equal to, like, I'm even going to just fake it for right now. C.customer ID is equal to 1 to get our 1 value. So at this point, all I have to do is replace this 1 with whatever it is that I'm connecting my outer query to.
Gotcha. And my only other question is, we were introduced in the reading this week, is the common table expression. And it seems pretty cool to basically kind of create a variable associated with the query and then use that in another one following it. But are we going to use that very often? Is that something I need to understand very well or just be familiar with?
Yeah, so those ones, those variables, they're not something you need to be too familiar with. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it too much because basically what you're doing is you're actually storing something as like a variable, temporary session variable. And I don't think it will come up. In fact, I don't recall even seeing any questions about it in the quiz. It's definitely more, so if you go on to take CIT 225, you'll actually be dealing a lot with that.
I have a
Thank you.
question about that. Expand the with clause is what you're using in the common table expression. It's different than using the fabricated derived table from the from clause, correct?
Yes. Yes. Here, let's pull up one so we know where. Yeah, the common table, it's I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's that's one of the more kind of, I guess if you have a need for it, it's one of those things that you find that you need to use. But it's it shouldn't be on any of your quizzes for sure. If that makes sense. It's kind of just like a it's a good way to do recursion and stuff like that. And so yeah, it's kind of just one of those what other ways to skin the cat type of a thing, but it's a little different. I'll make sure it's not on the quiz, but it shouldn't be. And if show it, it'll just be a brief kind of like question from the quiz, I believe, or from the book. I don't think I definitely don't think there's any exercises or anything on it, but I'll check. Does anyone else have any other questions while I look that up? If on there, we'll cover it, but if not, we're going to skip it.
I'm good. Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone here who has any questions about final projects? Final projects, anybody? Okay. Yeah, so we're getting kind of, if you are working on a final project, we're kind of getting closer every day. It's crazy how fast it comes up. But yeah, we will we'll kind of just play it by ear. If you are stuck or if you feel like you're behind, feel free to reach out. Like I said in the announcement, I'm hoping to at least have a quick check-in with everybody who's doing it. And that could just be like a quick Teams message. Just feel free to DM me. Just wanted a real quick update just to make sure everyone who's doing it doesn't like end up in a bad place over it. Mainly I don't want you to be stuck like cram in the last little bit. So yeah, I kind of wanted to check in with everybody and just make sure there. Okay, let me make sure that there's no width in this quiz. There is. Yep, no width clause coverage. So I don't think you need to worry about that one too much. I mean, definitely know that it exists and stuff like that, but yeah. you'll do that's a little bit more advanced, I think. Recursion stuff. All righty. Well, if there's no other questions, I will let you guys go. I don't want to keep you for too long. And anyways, sorry for being late. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And yeah, have a good week.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.